Welcome to the Full Moon TV Buff, Episode 5. We're going to discuss the first season of Big Wolf on Campus from 1999. I watched this on YouTube. I had not seen this before, mainly because it was on Canadian television. As always, we start with the prominent crew and cast. You can also find links to a more complete credit list in the show notes. The showrunners were Peter Knight and Chris Biggs. Prominent directors included Adam Weissman. Prominent writers included Peter Knight, Chris Briggs, Jim Bernstein, Michael Shipley, Dan Kopelman, Joseph Malazzi, and Paul Milley. The effects makeup was done by Eric Gosselin and Julie Brisbois. This show was the first show Peter Knight had a part in creating. His most well-known credit is co-producing the Emmy-nominated BoJack Horseman. Chris Briggs' career is mostly in low-budget horror. Adam Weissman seems to have specialized in directing TV for teens. Some notable shows he has done multiple episodes for include Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide from 2004 to 2006, Drake and Josh from 2005 to 2007, Hannah Montana in 2010, and iCarly from 2007 to 2012, among a host of others. Jim Bernstein has been nominated for 2 Emmys, one for an episode of Phineas and Ferb in 2016, the other for American Dad from 2009. Jim wrote or helped write almost 1/3 of the Phineas and Ferb episodes. Michael Shipley was also nominated for an Emmy for American Dad in 2009. He's got many more credits for producing television than he does for writing television, with my personal favorite being My Name is Earl from 2007 to 2009. Dan Kopelman wrote and produced for the classic sitcom Malcolm in the Middle from 2000 through 2004. Joseph Malazzi and Paul Mully are easily best known for their work as writers and producers on the various Stargate TV series, SG-1, Atlantis, and Universe. Eric Gosselin has a long credit list as a special effects makeup artist. We'll see him again a couple of times in this project. I couldn't find any biographical details of note. His highest profile non-werewolf project is on X-Men Apocalypse in 2016. Julie Brisbois likewise has a long credit list as a makeup artist. I don't think we'll see her again. The list of credits she's worked on makes me think that she has been doing more French language productions than English language shows. The cast includes Danny Smith as Merton J. Dingle, Brandon Quinn as Tommy Dawkins, Dominic DeRosa as Tim Eckert, Rob DeLue as Travis Eckert, Rochelle Lefevre as Stacy Hansen. An interesting tidbit is that Danny Smith both wrote and performed the theme song for this show. He's been a part of a professional touring rock band, The City Drive. He's done mostly comedies and has transitioned to voice acting. Brandon Quinn was a high school athlete who began acting after a car accident prevented him from playing sports. He's made a respectable career out of guest spots on TV shows like Grimm or Bones, video game voices on games like L.A. Noire, and Christmas romantic comedies. Dominic DeRosa has stuck more to Canadian television, including a minor recurring role on the fantastic show Letterkenny. Rob DeLue has a similar career with a part in the high-profile Oscar-winning film Spotlight. Hey, we're going to see more of Rachel Lefevre when we get to New Moon in the Twilight Saga. I didn't recognize her, even though she appeared on Veronica Mars. She's had recent major roles on Under the Dome. Notable guest stars include Jack Mosshammer as Dean Dawkins, Natalie Vancier as Becky Dingle, Jane Wheeler as Sally Dawkins, Richard Jutras as Hugo Bostwick, and Alan Fawcett as Mayor Bob Dawkins. Jack Mosshammer had a long-term role on a television show called Train 48. In the last 5 years, he's recently appeared on American Gods, The Boys, and What We Do in the Shadows. Natalie Vancier's other major television role was on the rebooted Lassie in the late 90s. Jane Wheeler has a long acting career, but it appears that she's moved into voice acting, voice casting, and even voice direction work in recent years. It surprised me to see Richard Jutras has the longest IMDb credit list of all the actors on this show. His highest profile roles were in The Whole Nine Yards in 2000 and Stonewall in 2015. Alan Fawcett is an actor who has maintained a career as a writer in advertising and related fields. His most notable role is probably in the 2004 film The Day After Tomorrow. Now, the pilot struggles under the weight of its goals. Attempting to introduce a large ensemble cast, establish interpersonal dynamics, and explain the lycanthropic mythology within a 20-minute runtime is no small feat. This is a common challenge for sitcom pilots, which labor to set up the show's foundational elements. Some of my favorite sitcoms improved, with significant quality leaps occurring not just within the first season, but becoming more and more pronounced in the second season as creators refined their comedic approach, character development, and overall narrative direction. Unfortunately, Big Wolf on Campus did not get markedly better throughout the season. At present, I don't recommend it. However, I am aware that changes were made after the first season, which may address my primary criticisms, so a second season offers some hope. Here we are, our first live-action lycanthropic sitcom. The show follows in the footsteps of Teen Wolf and Teen Wolf 2, both films directly name-checked in the pilot. The central plot revolves around a teenager named Tommy P. Dawkins, who is bitten by a werewolf during a camping trip a week before his senior year of high school. After the bite transforms him into a werewolf, he fights against vampires, werecats, ghosts, zombies, and other supernatural entities to keep his hometown of Pleasantville safe. Even though almost everyone in Pleasantville believes that their protector, dubbed the Pleasantville Werewolf, is dangerous. Tommy has a moon-crossed relationship with cheerleader Stacy Perkins. Now, I felt like I needed to make a minor change to the format for TV show analysis. I'm going to discuss each major character briefly. Character comes out during a film's longer, more in-depth plot synopsis, but it doesn't in the short blurbs that I write for a TV episode. So I'll tease it out here this time. We'll see if this sticks around in the future. Let me know in the comments if it helps. First, let's talk about Tommy Dawkins. Tommy's our titular main character, the Big Wolf on Campus. A fairly stereotypical handsome jock. There would be little noteworthy about him if he wasn't a werewolf, but he is. He's a nice kid, prone to going in with the flow rather than sticking out. But he doesn't like bullies, and he's not stupid, but he puts little effort into school. Now, Merton Dingle, on the other hand, is a typical goth media nerd. He dresses almost exclusively in black, wears a coffin-shaped backpack, and drives an actual hearse. He's turned the entire basement of his house into a literal lair, that's what they call it on the show. He's got spiked dark black hair and always sticks out. He loves learning and excels at school. He's deeply into fantasy, sci-fi, and horror, and he is a magnet for bullies. Stacy Perkins. You could just call her Perfect Perkins. Stacy is a smart, talented, popular, and pretty cheerleader. Every boy desires her, and every girl wants to be friends with her. She's great at everything, including being a damsel in distress. Except one thing she's not good at is figuring out Tommy as the Pleasantville Werewolf. The issue is Tommy has every incentive to keep her away from the supernatural shenanigans, which are the focus of the show. Next, we'll talk about Tim and Travis Eckert, known collectively as TNT. These thugs are cartoon bullies, big, strong, dumb, and fat. They love eating, violence, and picking on people smaller than them, which is nearly everyone. They hate school. Dean Dawkins. Tommy's older brother, Dean, is an extreme couch potato. We only ever see him watching TV while reclining in a lazy boy and stuffing his fat face. No job, no plans, no help. Becky Dingle, Merton's little sister, is constantly embarrassed by her brother. She's a freshman and desperate to be cool. She showers Merton with disdain and scorn. For a while, she has a crush on Tommy. So now, let's cover the episode synopsis. First up, the pilot. On a camp out with friends, Tommy Dawkins is attacked by a werewolf and changed forever. He begins to uncontrollably change at football practice, the cafeteria, and his locker. On his first date with cheerleader Stacy Hansen, he fully wolfs out. The only person he can turn to for help is local goth geek Merton Dingle. Episode 2, The Bookmobile. A creepy bookmobile librarian witch scans a chubby cop, turning him into a book. Once every 70 years, every moon in the solar system is full on the same day, creating a window of transference offering Tommy a chance to pass his curse on to another person. Merton volunteers. However, solving the bookmobile-related missing persons case distracts Tommy until the window passes. Episode 3, Butch Comes to Shove. Tommy uses the wolf to protect Merton from bullies. Butch, the bully, steps out of a 50s-era anti-bullying film and decides to find someone to bring back with him. He almost lures Stacy into the movie before Tommy saves the day. Episode 4, Catwoman. Exotic foreign exchange student Carol Lefevre begins attending Pleasantville High. She thinks Tommy has a certain je ne sais quoi. Stacy is jealous of Carol and Tommy's chemistry. Merton spends the episode working on a biology project with Tim and Travis. Turns out Carol is a Catwoman. Carol and Stacy fight over Tommy before he rescues Stacy, and Carol returns home. Episode 5, Witch College. A local college sorority recruits Stacy. Tommy is initially thrilled since it means she won't leave town after high school. The sorority turns out to be a coven of witches that casts a spell on Stacy, who starts acting like a real witch. Merton plans on studying in Heisenberg with his idol, Professor Fugelhoff. Tommy tricks the witches into turning on each other. Episode 6, the Pleasantville Strangler. School security guard Hugo and Merton inadvertently release the Pleasantville Strangler, the ghost of a serial killer who jumps from body to body. The spirit hunts Tommy, since his ancestor originally brought the madman to justice. The stranger ends up as a statue before our heroes knock it back into the well. Episode 7, Stage Fright. An insane vigilante cableman named Santini traps those using pirated cable inside the TV shows they watch. Merton and Tommy catalog werewolf data about Tommy in their search for a cure. Merton accidentally gives the book to a fellow student and risks exposing Tommy. Merton saves the day by connecting an old coaxial cable to a port and zapping the cable man. Episode 8, That Swamp Thing You Do. 25 years ago, a hippie teacher fell into a toxic swamp, mutated into a monster, and missed his wedding. In the present, Hugo and English teacher Miss Baxter plan to marry for purely the most mundane of reasons. The swamp monster returns, looking for his old fiancée. Surprise, it's Miss Baxter. The Wolf Squad helps the long-separated couple get back together. Episode 9, Muffy the Werewolf Slayer. A soul-sucking door-to-door salesman drains Tommy's mom and dad dull. New goth girl, Vesper, honey traps Merton into giving up Tommy's identity as the Pleasantville werewolf. She's actually a werewolf slayer on the hunt. This leaves Tommy to deal with the supernatural salesman and the slayer alone. Episode 10, Stalk Like an Egyptian. Tommy and Merton unwittingly resurrect a mummy on a school field trip. They do a lot of things unwittingly. The dead king becomes a teenage boy out to find a queen. He sets his sights on Stacy and uses mind control. He struggles to fit into high school and places the student body under a curse of the plagues of Egypt. Merton uses a mirror to reflect his mental powers and removes his ring of power. Episode 11, Flugelhoff. Merton invites his idol, lycanthropist Professor Flugelhoff from the University of Heisenberg, to study Tommy. Flugelhoff believes that he can cure Tommy. Tommy wants to attend Stacy's birthday party, except it's on a full moon. The cure lets Tommy go to the party and kiss Stacy, but he and Merton drift apart. Unfortunately, Flugelhoff is a mad scientist intending to conquer the world with a werewolf army created from a serum made with Tommy's blood. Tommy recovers the serum and saves the world by turning back into a werewolf. Episode 12, Invisible Merton. Merton's nemesis, Alistair Black, returns to Pleasantville after learning some real magic while studying at Transylvania High School. He steals Merton's role as president of the Gothic Fantasy Guild and casts a spell on Merton, rendering him invisible. Tommy's parents take him to a psychiatrist since they're worried about his very odd behaviors. Merton pretends to use magic to turn Tommy into a werewolf and defeat the teenage warlock. Episode 13, The Wolf is Out There. The werewolf in Tommy supersizes his appetite and waistline, leading to fried chicken theft. Meanwhile, Merton must participate in a sport to earn his required PE credit. Tommy is caught on security camera at the chicken shack in werewolf form. Hugo gathers a mob to hunt the Pleasantville werewolf, and Tommy's mom makes it worse when she offers a cash reward for her own son's capture. Merton chains Tommy up in his lair to keep him safe. Tommy has to break free to save Stacy from a monstrous date. Tommy narrowly avoids being captured by the mob and exposed. 14, Time and Again. A strange man gives Merton a pocket watch that reverses time. Merton uses the powers to pick up girls and avoid bullies. Unfortunately, the man collects a piece of Merton's intelligence every time he uses it, eventually dropping his IQ below even Tim and Travis. Meanwhile, Tommy tries using classical music to tame his inner wolf while on a date with Stacy. It doesn't work. It also doesn't help that Tommy has to ditch Stacy to rescue Merton. Episode 15, Fangs for the Memories. Tommy donates blood to impress Stacy. Merton freaks out since the werewolf curse can be transferred by blood, so they have to steal Tommy's blood back from the blood bank. A trio of Lost Boys reject vampires blow into town robbing blood banks. They capture Stacy and force Tommy to face them in a supernatural gang fight. The makeup and story make this feel like it was originally intended for much earlier in the season. Episode 16, Interview with a Werewolf. An eccentric florist sets Merton up on a blind date with her niece, except the florist doesn't actually have a niece, and instead drains the life out of some flowers to make herself young. She sucks the youth right out of Merton, too. Meanwhile, Stacy starts falling in love with a Pleasantville werewolf. Tommy and Merton have to steal magic spring water to save Merton. Episode 17, Big Bad Wolf. Stacy's old boyfriend and former big man on campus, Eric McIntyre, shows up to interfere with Tommy's burgeoning relationship. For the first time, the werewolf in Tommy gets angry. He speaks an Indian chant that accidentally splits himself into his good and dark halves. The Pleasantville werewolf finally gets violent, and Tommy has to stop himself and save the day. Episode 18, Scary Terry. Fellow student Terry is even more of a bullied outcast than Merton. Like Carrie, she's psychic. Merton's little sister Becky goes on her first date, distracting Merton. Terry crushes on Tommy when he shows her basic human kindness and asks him out to the Sadie Hawkins dance. Things get scary when Terry learns Tommy just feels sorry for her and she gets jealous of Stacy. Episode 19, Hair Today, Gone Tomorrow. Cool new substitute teacher, Mr. Dunleavy, takes over biology class. Mr. D is also a werewolf, a balding werewolf, who replaces Merton as Tommy's mentor. When he learns Merton knows his secret, he reveals himself to be an evil werewolf who kills people. He is also the werewolf who originally bit Tommy. Episode 20, The Exorcist. Makeup and continuity indicate this episode was intended to air early in the season. After a bullying incident, Merton's sister Becky gets assigned a locker that serves as a portal to the netherworld. Their parents are out of town, so Merton throws a party in an attempt to become more popular. Tommy goes public as Merton's friend in this episode. Becky gets pulled into the portal and possessed. Of course, Tommy and Merton save her. Episode 21, Don't Fear the Reaper. Tommy defends a senior citizen from the literal Grim Reaper, who takes the defeat personally. Merton is somehow in charge of the school play Romeo and Juliet, which he's adapting into a sci-fi setting. Stacy is playing Juliet, so Tommy auditions for Romeo to get some time with her. Tommy plays chess against Death and Yahtzee and Connect Four and Clue. Tommy loses every game, so Tommy fakes his death to death. I don't understand how that worked. Episode 22, Game Over. Tommy beats the 10th level of an arcade game. This releases the game's antagonist, Dirk Strikeham, who decides to destroy Tommy and Merton in retribution. Stacy doesn't like that Tommy plays video games, another reason they should not end up together. Meanwhile, a freshman geek girl has a crush on Merton. Tommy tricks Dirk into destroying his own game cabinet. The entire first season's arc revolves around Tommy wooing Stacy. Truth be told, the two aren't great for each other, and they show signs of that from the very beginning. Other than the fact that they are both attractive young people, they don't have anything in common. On top of that, Tommy's werewolf secret stands between the two. We'll delve into the secret identity concept more later. The season does end with them together. There is no arc related to Tommy's lycanthropy. Perhaps that will change in the next two seasons. These two issues are my biggest complaints with the show. I like the characters. I understand the low budget. There is one very funny ongoing gag where Merton relates the current predicament, whatever it is, to a famous film. When Tommy asks what happens next, Merton spins off into filmmaking trivia instead of relaying the potentially useful plot of the film. Talking about the transformation, I worried about this. It is better than I feared, but it could be better. I accept the show's creators had to be frugal with what appears to be a thin budget, so I'll cut them some slack. The partial transformations in the pilot are decent, and we do get one good metamorphosis. The actual werewolf look is very simplistic. A bushy hairstyle with sideburns linked to a mustache, eyebrows, a soul patch, contact lenses, prosthetic nose and ears, furried arms and hands, and clawed fingertips. We get an example of what I expect to be the standard transformation, a quick spiral wipe from human to werewolf that honestly reminded me of a live-action adaptation of the transformation from Fangface. Later in the season, the prosthetic nose and the ears drop in and out, and the look gets even more Spartan. My understanding is the prosthetic glue proved hard on Brandon Quinn's skin, so they had to adapt. Moving on to werewolf lore. Merton is our lore master, not just for Tommy and lycanthropy. Merton knows everything about vampires, ghosts, and all other paranormal phenomena. He quotes Professor Flugelhoff constantly, along with a plethora of other supernatural sources, both literary and digital. The show mostly sticks pretty close to the standard cinematic lycanthropic lore. The condition is passed along via bite or blood. While the full moon is important and does trigger transformations, it's not the only factor in activating shifts. So is Tommy's emotional state. Arousal, anger, and nerves all cause him to wolf out, much more frequently than the lunar cycle would dictate. I don't remember any discussion on the show of any specific weaknesses. I expect because it's a touch too morbid for a sitcom to discuss how to harm or kill a teenager. Both werewolves we see in the show retain complete control of their actions and remember everything they do. Professor Flugelhoff does know a cure, but that doesn't weigh on Tommy, mostly because there are no real stakes to his lycanthropic condition. Other than making his dating life difficult, there is almost no downside to being a werewolf on this show. Since we finally have a live-action werewolf sitcom to analyze, let's summarize the history of the televised situation comedy. The genre appeared in the early days of broadcast media, evolving directly from radio comedy programs that dominated entertainment in the 30s and 40s. Shows like Amos and Andy, which transitioned from radio to television in 1951, represent early attempts to translate comedic storytelling into the new visual medium. Early sitcoms were typically stage-like productions, featuring minimal sets and performers mimicking theatrical or radio presentations, with actors often speaking directly to the camera or performing in front of a live studio audience. The 50s marked a golden age of sitcom development, with shows like I Love Lucy revolutionizing the genre. Lucille Ball's groundbreaking program established many comedic conventions and pioneered innovative production techniques. The show's multiple cameras, sophisticated comedic timing, and narrative structure became blueprints for future sitcoms. This era was dominated by family-centered comedies reflecting post-war American suburban ideals, like Leave It to Beaver and The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. By the 60s, sitcoms branched out to explore different social themes. Shows like The Dick Van Dyke Show balanced domestic with workplace humor, while Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie experimented with fantastical premises beyond traditional realistic settings. Behind the camera, production techniques continued to be improved and refined, but not really changed. The 70s represented a transformative period for TV comedy, marked by programming confronting contemporary issues head-on. Norman Lear's productions like All in the Family and Sanford and Son pushed boundaries by addressing racism, generational conflicts, and political tension, all through humor. Simultaneously, shows like The Mary Tyler Moore Show began presenting female characters who existed beyond their traditional domestic roles, representing shifts in the broader culture who was watching TV. The 80s and early 90s saw the sitcom evolve into a polished, technically sophisticated medium. The Cosby Show and Cheers represented pinnacles of ensemble comedy, demonstrating how carefully constructed character dynamics could sustain long-running series. These programs perfected the multi-camera format, utilizing sophisticated laugh tracks and intricate staging. Shows like Seinfeld introduced meta-comedic approaches that challenged traditional narrative structures. The late 90s and early 2000s saw significant genre transformation. Single-camera formats popularized by shows like Malcolm in the Middle and Scrubs dispensed with live studio audiences and laugh tracks, creating a more cinematic comedy experience. This period also saw the rise of mockumentary-style sitcoms, like The Office, which brought a more naturalistic, improvisational approach to television comedy. Contemporary sitcoms in the streaming era have become increasingly experimental, with shows like Atlanta, Barry, and Ted Lasso blending comedy with dramatic elements and challenging traditional genre boundaries. Streaming platforms allow for even more serialized storytelling, complex character arcs, and a willingness to blend styles unimaginable in earlier television eras. The sitcom's evolution reflects broader cultural shifts, serving as entertainment and as a dynamic cultural document. From its humble radio-inspired beginnings to today's genre-defying productions, the television sitcom has continually reinvented itself, mirroring societal norms, technological innovations, and collective humor. On top of being our first TV sitcom, this is our first TV show produced in Canada. I had to do some research. Please correct me if I get something wrong here. Canadian television emerged in the early 50s, shaped by the nation's geography and proximity to American broadcasting. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC, launched its first television stations in Montreal and Toronto in 1952. This dual-language approach reflected Canada's cultural heritage and set the stage for a broadcasting system prioritizing both English and French content. The CBC is a public broadcasting company, but it wasn't long before the country's first private network, CTV, appeared in 1961. This introduced competition to the broadcasting landscape, while highlighting tensions between public and private interests in Canadian media. The 60s also saw the emergence of educational television networks with TV Ontario and Radio Quebec, now Tele-Quebec. In the 70s, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, CRTC, implemented Canadian content requirements known as CanCon, mandating networks dedicate a specific percentage of their programming to Canadian-produced content. This led to a boom in the 80s for Canadian television production, fueled by technological advances and increased funding for domestic programming. This period saw the rise of distinctly Canadian productions like The Beachcombers and Front Page Challenge, establishing a national television identity competing with American imports. Shows like Degrassi Junior High gained international recognition, demonstrating that Canadian content could connect with broader audiences. The 90s saw the emergence of breakthrough comedy programming, with shows like Kids in the Hall and This Hour Has 22 Minutes, establishing a distinctive Canadian comic voice that gained international recognition. My personal favorite Canadian comedies include Second City Television and The Red Green Show. The turn of the millennium saw consolidation and digital transformation. Canadian television achieved new heights of international success with shows like Corner Gas, Trailer Park Boys, and Schitt's Creek, demonstrating the growing sophistication and appeal of Canadian productions. Productions like Kim's Convenience, Letterkenny, and Anne with an E found success balancing distinctly Canadian perspectives with universal themes while maintaining high production values matching international standards. Canada has a strong cultural minority presence in its television broadcasting. French language and Indigenous-led television have developed their own distinct identities, with networks like Télévisions Associées, TVA, and Aboriginal Peoples Television Network, APTN. Production companies created content reflecting the unique cultural positions of these groups in North America. This parallel development has provided models for successful regional programming while contributing to national cultural diversity. The contemporary Canadian television landscape continues to evolve. Regulatory frameworks are trying to adapt to address streaming services, while production companies explore new funding models and international partnerships. Secret identities in romantic relationships are a storytelling staple, presenting a tension between intimacy and deception. Existing before Superman and Lois Lane, these narratives expose the challenges of maintaining a connection while hiding aspects of one's identity. At its core, the secret identity romance presents a paradox. How can a genuine, intimate relationship develop when one partner is actively deceiving the other? This question has plagued countless stories, often leading to contrivances that strain audience belief. In Spider-Man from 2002, Mary Jane Watson's failure to recognize Peter Parker's voice or mannerisms during their intimate moments stretches credibility. Characters like Oliver Queen and Arrow must act uncharacteristically to maintain their cover, creating what TV tropes calls idiot ball moments, where otherwise intelligent characters must temporarily become dense to serve the plot. However, when handled skillfully, these limitations can yield interesting character studies. Batman, the animated series, effectively uses Bruce Wayne's playboy persona to reflect his inner turmoil, particularly in his relationship with Andrea Beaumont in Mask of the Phantasm from 1993. The secret identity becomes not just a plot device, but a metaphor for the character's inability to maintain a genuine connection. That moment of revelation often serves as a crucial turning point in these narratives, but it can also expose the structural weaknesses of the trope. When poorly handled, the revelation can feel anticlimactic, or worse, make the love interest appear foolish for not having figured it out sooner. Despite all these challenges, the secret identity romance does create opportunities. The audience's awareness of the truth creates a three-way dramatic tension between what they know, what the hero knows, and what the love interest knows. This dynamic can be particularly effective in exploring themes of trust, intimacy, and personal sacrifice. Matt Murdock's relationships in Netflix Daredevil series frequently examine how his dual identity as a vigilante impacts his ability to maintain honest connections, both with love interest Karen Page, but also with his best friend Foggy Nelson. The secret identity becomes a metaphor for the walls people build in relationships and the cost of maintaining those walls. Now, contemporary storytelling has begun to subvert or reinvent this trope in some pretty interesting ways. Iron Man in 2008 boldly concludes with Tony Stark revealing his identity to the world, eliminating the traditional secret identity dynamic entirely. Anime and manga have contributed interesting variations on this theme. My Hero Academia presents a world where superpowered individuals are more commonplace, shifting the focus from hiding powers to managing public personas. This allows for the exploration of how extraordinary abilities affect relationships, without relying on traditional secret identity mechanics. Shows like Miraculous, Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir found success by making the secret identity drama reciprocal, with both partners hiding heroic identities from each other, adding layers of complexity to a traditional formula. So how does Big Wolf on Campus compare? Unfortunately, it falls short on multiple levels. Tommy consistently deceives Stacy, frequently breaking plans and endangering her with his lies. His character becomes increasingly problematic as Stacy fails to recognize the obvious signs of his werewolf identity. Despite multiple close encounters, she remains oblivious to Tommy's transformations, which are bizarrely unconvincing. His physical appearance barely changes, and he maintains his Letterman's jacket throughout his supposed werewolf transitions, undermining any semblance of supernatural credibility. The need to maintain the secret identity often forces Stacy into the background, making her a distraction or someone who's interfering with the more exciting plot that's going on. Now, the trope's evolution in modern storytelling suggests it does still have life, particularly when writers find ways to subvert or reinvent its traditional elements. As audiences become more genre savvy, the challenge lies in finding fresh approaches that maintain dramatic tension without sacrificing character integrity or narrative plausibility. The success of these stories often depends not on whether they employ the trope, but on how they use it to illustrate the truths about human relationships and personal identity that they've set out to explore. So, if you like lycanthropes, like, share, and subscribe. Contribute your thoughts and additional observations in the comments below. Let me know what I missed or what you noticed. Next, we're going to move on to Season 2 of Big Wolf on Campus, and probably Season 3 in the same episode. Keep your eye on the moon, a silver bullet in the chamber, and we'll see you back next episode.